Just kind of kick us off a little bit and talk a little bit about Thrive and what is Sioux Falls Thrive, so you have a better understanding, kind of the framework and where things are. Sioux Falls Thrive started in 2017 as a cradle to career workforce implementation program, a development initiative. It's a volunteer-based organization looking at the collective impact and how we bring solutions to some of the housing challenges and other challenges within the community. Thrive's mission is to help children in Sioux Falls area to have the same opportunities to succeed in the workforce and to work to provide stability in 3 key areas, and you'll see them on the screen as well. Out of school time, food security, and affordable housing. Thrive does not focus on what goes on inside the classroom. The school system does a great job of that. So we look at what's going on outside of the school system and how we can improve the livelihoods of these children so that they can have a better education, a better outlook. To accomplish the mission, Thrive establishes action teams, and in each of the 3 areas I just mentioned. These action teams focus on creating systemic change in the conditions surrounding the education systems. These teams comprise of community individuals from government, from nonprofit, community organizations. So a wide variety of folks participate in these teams. The team you're hearing from this evening is the Housing Action Team, or HAT. So the vision of the HAT will be on the screen as well too, but it's to advocate for adequate housing for the most vulnerable populations in Sioux Falls. The team has worked for the past several years on a couple of different initiatives, and I want to highlight 2 that we have worked on over the last couple of years. One is the One Roof program and the creation of the housing retention specialist position. One Roof is a program that is operated through the community outreach, and it works with households or families who are precariously housed, who cannot find housing for a variety of reasons, maybe homeless or at risk of homelessness. They work with them over a period of years in conjunction with landlords who choose to participate in the program. And they work for that 1 year, and they get financial education, they get rental education, they have case management services. At the end of that year, if both parties, the landlord and the household, agree, they can continue that lease and be housed. The other program is the Housing Retention Specialist. This was initially a pilot program, just as the One Roof was a pilot program, and it was funded through the Community Innovation Grant from the Bush Foundation. And that was a 2-year pilot program, and that program created a retention specialist with the idea that that person would be a conduit between the housing provider and the tenant. And they would work with them at the first sign of a housing issue, maybe the first time they missed a rent payment, maybe a lease violation, things of that nature. And they intervene at the earliest possible time to prevent an eviction. And that program has been very successful as well. It's been so successful that East River Legal Services has taken it on as a permanent program within their services. By your presence here this evening, you are either aware of what the housing challenges are, or you're interested in learning more about the housing challenges, and more importantly, the solutions to some of the housing challenges that we have. Over the past few months, maybe more than a few months, probably 6 months or more, this HAT team has been working on a housing trust fund proposal. So this evening you're going to hear more about that and more how we came to that solution and some call to actions, quite honestly. So we're going to look at that. So the first thing I want to do now is turn the mic over to Dr. Susie Smith, and she's going to talk about some of the programs there.
Great, thanks Roger. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. So my name is Susie Smith, I'm from Augustana. I work with the Augustana Research Institute, or ARI. This is a center at Augustana University that focuses on community-based research. And we're also the data and research partner for Sioux Falls Thrive. Our very first project with Thrive back in 2016 was to conduct an affordable housing needs assessment for Sioux Falls. And this was jointly commissioned by the City of Sioux Falls and by Sioux Falls Thrive. And then in 2021, we conducted an updated housing needs assessment. And the results of that study have been the basis for planning for the Housing Trust Fund. So I'm going to speak briefly to some of the data points from that 2021 needs assessment. You can find the full report on Thrive's website or at augie.edu/findings if this piques your interest. Before we get too far into the Sioux Falls data, I want to share a couple definitions so that we're all on the same page. I'm going to start with affordability. So what's affordable for a family really depends on their income. Instead of naming a certain sales price or a certain rent level that defines affordability, we're going to follow standard practice of defining affordable as housing costs that are less than 30% of a household's income. And when I talk about housing costs, I mean gross housing costs, so including rent or your mortgage, as well as insurance and utilities. So if you take a household, for example, with a monthly income of $10,000, they could affordably spend $3,000 on housing. But if you have a household with a monthly income of, say, $2,000, then affordable housing for them means finding a place to live for less than $600 a month. All right, second term I want to define is MFI, or Area Median Family Income. You might also hear this referred to as AMI, means the same thing. MFI is a way of talking about a family's income relative to the typical income in a community. And it's used to establish eligibility for some federal housing programs and also helps us kind of paint the picture of where different households fall in Sioux Falls. All right, so if you break down the words in MFI, area here means the Sioux Falls metropolitan area, so that's Minnehaha, Lincoln, Turner, and McCook counties. Median means a midpoint, so we're talking about the midpoint of family income. Half of the families in Sioux Falls have incomes higher, half have incomes lower. When we say family, we're talking about two or more related people living together. So if that dollar amount on the screen up there seems high to you, it's because that's the midpoint of incomes for families. We're not talking about sort of single earners. And then finally, income means earnings and other sources of income. Right, so HUD updates these definitions every year. For 2022, a family of 4 living in Sioux Falls, the median income was $90,700. When I say 100% MFI, that's the number I'm talking about for a family of 4. All right, so now, what does this have to do with the Housing Trust Fund? The Housing Trust Fund is set up to help renters whose incomes are below 40% of the area median family income. About 1 in 3 renter households in Sioux Falls fall in that range. That's about 9,000 households, right? 9,000 families that we're talking about. And this income threshold, Sept, based on findings from the 2021 Housing Needs Assessment. So let's look at some of the data that led them to pick that 40% MFI threshold. So the chart you're looking at shows in dark blue the number of rental housing units available in Sioux Falls at different rent levels. And you can see, if you look at those bars, that there are a lot more rental units that rent for $650 or more than below. On the other hand, in yellow, you see the number of renter households in Sioux Falls, and they've been grouped according to the maximum rent that would be affordable for them. So in other words, we looked at renter households and we asked, based on their monthly income, what's the most rent they could pay and keep their housing costs under 30% of their income. Right? And so you can see there's plenty of rental units in those middle rent levels, but there's a shortage of units that are affordable to renters with the lowest incomes. In fact, if you were to crunch some of these numbers, there's about a 4,500 unit gap for folks at those lowest income levels, incomes below $20,000 a year. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you might be looking and notice that there are a lot of renters with higher incomes who could afford more expensive rent, more expensive than most units rent for here in the city. One effect of that is that these renters are likely renting down and taking up some of those more affordable rental units. So when we take into account the shortage of less expensive rental units coupled with higher income households absorbing some of those cheaper units, we find that in Sioux Falls, there are about 28 affordable and available units for every 100 renter households that are at or below 30% MFI. So that's kind of a measure of that gap, right? And so here, affordable, again, means a unit they could afford at 30% of their income or below. Available means that it's already rented by someone in that income range, or that it's open and available for rent, right? So we've taken out the ones that are being rented by someone in a higher income range. So that's the challenge. Now the question is, what happens when a family can't find an affordable home? Well, often they find an unaffordable one. So this next chart looks at cost burden renters, and these are households who end up in unaffordable homes. They're paying more than 30% of their income for housing. The blue bars indicate households who have a housing cost burden that could range from just over 30% of their income in light blue to 50% or more of their income going toward housing in the dark blue. Now those yellow bars are households that are in affordable housing. They're at 30% or below of their income. You can see that almost all renters with a household income under $35,000 a year face a housing cost burden, right? So that's kind of an income threshold to keep in mind. Now in Sioux Falls, over a third of renters are cost burdened. So again, that's 9 or 10,000 households. And of those, about 5,000 households spend over half their monthly income on housing. I'll leave you with just a couple more numbers before I hand things over to other panelists who are going to give you a fuller picture of the problem as well as the proposed solution. But when people can't find affordable housing, and when housing becomes so unaffordable that a cost burden isn't even an option anymore, some people may lose their housing altogether. Last winter, on a single Tuesday night in January in Sioux Falls, we identified 490 individuals who were unsheltered or in emergency shelters, and of those, 66 were children under the age of 18, and 29 were youth between the ages of 18 and 24. Now our schools also keep a cumulative count of children who experience homelessness during the year, and this includes children who are unsheltered. It also includes children who might be couch surfing, sleeping outside, in a car with their families. During the last school year, 22 to 23, the Sioux Falls School District identified 1,364 children who were unhoused at some point during the year. That's a lot of numbers and a lot of information to digest. If you want to dig deeper into the study, again, it's on Thrive's website. It's on augie.edu/findings. But for now, I will hand things back to Kenley to introduce our panelists.
Thank you. All right, we are going to introduce our next panel. I want to introduce our moderator, Rika Peterson, the Senior Consultant of Maximizing Excellence, Dolores Lip, Housing Navigator at Minnehaha County Human Services, Holly Schluter, the Case Manager in the Synergy Program at Minnehaha County, Allison Thompson, the Housing Retention Specialist, East River Legal Services, Richie Hutchinson, Assistant Principal at George McGovern, and Joan Fraken, Managing Director at Costello Companies.
All right, thank you, Kenley. Happy to be here. We are going to jump right into the panel once everyone gets situated. All right, we are going to, each one of our panelists has something a little bit different and special to share based on their perspective in the industry. We're going to start with Dolores Lip and Holly Schluter. For a little over a year, Dolores has been the Housing Navigator for Minnehaha County Human Services. She assists people who have housing challenges in navigating the complex and confusing world of affordable and subsidized housing. And then Holly Schluter is a case manager in the Synergy Program at Minnehaha County Human Services. Her care facilitation focuses on the homeless families in Minnehaha and Lincoln counties to help them secure safe and affordable housing based upon their unique situations. So, What is Synergy and who does Synergy serve? Let's start there.
Synergy is a voluntary supportive services program offered through Minnehaha County Human Services. Again, we offer short-term case management for families who are either homeless or at risk of homelessness. We support the Housing First approach with our families, which just basically means that housing is our foundation. Once they get housed, then we start building on the other needs of the family, but the Housing First is again, the foundation. There are two of us who are case managers under the Synergy program. It's myself and my coworker, Jeanette Spons. And we couldn't do our job without collaborating with our many, many community partners. All of our care referrals that come in go through a team of people to review those referrals on a weekly basis. So those partners, we meet with the Sioux Falls School District, Harrisburg School District, Dawson through the Genesis program at Community Outreach, and the shelters, Union Gospel Mission, and Bishop Dudley. So the folks that come through are receiving care and attention from all of those.
Thank you. Dolores, what would you say about the program and the number one challenge that your clients face?
I would just to introduce the housing navigation program. It's a little bit different than Synergy. Whereas Synergy works with families, I focus on individuals who are having housing challenges. Probably the typical, I don't know if we could call anything typical, but generally a lot of my referrals will be folks who are over 55 in age, who have a new disability, and that disability has affected their earnings, and so they may have been kind of living on the fringes before, but making it, and now because of their new situation, they've run into a lot more trouble. So that's kind of typical of who I might be working with. I think the biggest challenge, honestly, is just the affordable housing, enough housing for folks at all the different levels. I also work with a lot of folks that I work with have lost their ability to earn for a time, and so they may be at zero income or at 15% of AMI, and so they're earning $1,000 a month, less than that. They're applying for benefits, they're trying to get their feet back under them, and so it's just very challenging. So I think that is the number one challenge, and probably the second challenge is supports once people are housed, finding ways to keep people successfully housed.
Thank you. Holly, anything you would add to challenges?
I'm just going to piggyback off her. It's affordable housing for our working clients that come to us. And then in addition to finding affordability, you add barriers onto them. It could be rental history, evictions, credit maybe too low. So compounded, it makes it tough, really tough.
Thank you. So Roger had already previewed the housing retention specialist. We have her on stage tonight, Allison. Allison Thompson is the HRS at East River Legal Services. She has a master's degree in family counseling and child therapy and more than 12 years experience in the human services field. Her role started as a pilot project created by the Housing Action Team at Thrive and hosted at East River Legal, sorry. So, Allison, why was your position created? What is the purpose of it? Roger already covered some of it. Anything you would add?
Well, I just want to mention that my position was developed by the Sioux Falls Housing Action Team just with the same purpose as the group, just to eliminate homelessness for Sioux Falls families, especially those who have children in the household. As my role, my main goal is to avoid evictions. I basically offer case management services and trying to find solutions for those with small housing issues, before they turn into consequential ones. So I work with the tenants and the landlords as well, just to finding solutions, like I said.
Yeah. And what happens when a family's rent is too high for their income? Any short-term, long-term effects that you see?
So in a short term, when we have a family that is paying too much of their income in rent, you're gonna see a family that is in a constant struggle. Living check to check, trying to find out how they're gonna be paying or afford all their expenses. They don't have enough to put money aside, so they're gonna try to max out all their credit cards, and that's gonna have an impact on their credit. Sometimes they need to choose, well, maybe I will buy my medication this month, and maybe I will just pay a little bit for my electricity bill. So all this is gonna continue to add up, and then if this family is going into an emergency or something come up, car breakdown, sickness in the family, they're gonna get behind. And even if they get a little bit of assistance, just like I said, it's just gonna continue to add up, and now we're gonna have another family that is gonna be at risk of being evicted. And then if they go through an eviction, now their credit is not so good. They're gonna try to look for a new place. We already mentioned there is unfortunately lack of affordable units, plus having an eviction in their record. It's gonna be very, very hard to rehome this family, unfortunately.
Thank you. Up next, we'll hear from Richie Hutchinson. He will provide a perspective from the school district. He is assistant principal at George McGovern Middle School. He'll have an educator's perspective on the panel tonight, drawing from his time serving in our schools to shed light on the impact of homelessness on students' academic and personal well-being. He has a passion for this project and for cultivating inclusive and supportive environments for vulnerable youth to access opportunities for success. Richie, I have a question. Yeah, let's start off. What are the effects of unstable housing on a student's educational experience and achievement?
Yeah, so I'm a storyteller, so I'll just tell a quick little story. I like to take my dogs out for a walk every day at a park here in Sioux Falls, and literally 3 days ago, I come around the restroom that was open, and there is a lady probably about my age, and she's coming out of that restroom, and she takes just a moment to collect herself, and then she grabs 2-gallon jugs of water, puts a smile on her face even though she didn't originally have it, and pretty soon I see her at her car, and she's got a young daughter there, and she starts to wash her hair. And my first reaction was, this is beautiful. This is a mother taking care of her kid, because at that time it's almost 70 degrees out, it's morning, and it's beautiful. And then my head begins to go to all the what ifs. She's got a shirt on, she's obviously working at a local fast food, and I think, where is that daughter gonna go when mom goes to work? What is that daughter gonna be concerned about? If there's an emergency, how's she gonna get in touch with her? And then my mind as an educator goes to the next step. It's February. And I wonder, how is this daughter going to get to school? I wonder, how is this daughter, when she gets there, going to be able to concentrate? What about the food needs? What about the stigma of wearing the same clothes or the same pair of clothes and changing those out every other week, and the social needs of a middle school student? And I'm proud that I work a part of an organization that does a lot to help the students. We have social workers, and we have liaisons, and we have all kinds of people throwing a net out there to help these students. And our teachers, more importantly, are buying students food when they need it and helping them out in every way they can. Maybe some of those daily life things, so they don't have to deal with that stigma. But the reality of it is even with all that work and all that effort, it's about a 4-fold negative impact on the education of a student. And so when we see students who come from a homeless background, for instance, we may see 50% of our students, and we do see about 50% of our students proficient in ELA, and we see more like 15% of our homeless students proficient. In math, it's almost identical. And then when we talk about the most important thing, because tests don't tell us everything, but being there and having the opportunity does tell us a lot. And that's where we really see the impact of not having the housing. And we see about 80% of our students at school on a regular basis every day. If you're in a homeless situation, we see about 34% of them. When we consider chronic attendance or chronic absenteeism, it's about 60% of our homeless students experience that. And so it's a miss on an opportunity to grow and to learn. And most importantly, we know the data, I won't give it to you exactly because I don't have it right at the top of my head, but the amount that a person makes having a high school education versus in a high school diploma versus if they don't is incredible. And so we miss the opportunity to change this cycle. So I stand here as a community member because day in, day out, we're trying to rescue people, but I want to figure out how to go upriver and see if we can create a scenario where we're not rescuing people in this situation.
Thank you. And final question for you, do you have any idea of how prevalent this is in the Sioux Falls School District?
Yeah, I do, and I didn't answer that because we saw that statistic early, and that's right on. It runs right around that 1,300 mark of how prevalent it is. That's a very hard mark to track when you're in a homeless situation. It's tough to figure out that because it can change from sleeping on a couch to sleeping in a hotel to sleeping in a car, and you could be shifting from school to school, which can also impact your education because you're not, even if you're going, you're not getting the same curriculum and you're missing pieces of it. So it's about 1,300 would be the number that's out there, but I would guess it's higher than that if we were actually able to get a accurate 100% count.
Thank you. Last but not least, we'll hear from Joan Franken. She's one of the owners and the managing director for Costello Companies and has been with the company for 28 years. She has been involved in and overseen the development of 48 affordable housing apartment complexes in South Dakota and Wyoming, creating 1,975 units of affordable housing in several communities. She oversees the management of 4,800 apartments across the Midwest and land developments with single-family, multifamily, commercial, and industrial lots in Sioux Falls, Harrisburg, and Hartford. She volunteers as a board member for several housing-related organizations, both locally and nationally. So Joan, it's well documented we don't have enough affordable housing available in Sioux Falls. So some might ask, why don't you just build us some more, right? But what prevents developers and or builders from doing more?
So this is what we do. This is what our company is known for. We've got 50 years into affordable housing. We don't develop market rate housing. So these affordable housing communities that we are in need of is directly what we do. We can only build so many a year, and we plan out 2 to 5 years in advance. And the challenge is that the funding. And so for us to target between 30% and I'll say 80% of area median income, that's who we serve. We need to get funding from South Dakota Housing. They're the provider of funding for these types of complexes. They have the low-income housing tax credits, the home funds, and I will say national housing trust funds, which are different than what we are talking about today, and housing opportunity funds. And those funding sources are limited. We don't get much more than we did when the program was created in 1986 because we are a minimum population state, so we get the base amount, the minimum amount allocated. Those funds are allocated to developers in our industry, but across the state. So not just Sioux Falls, not just Rapid City, but across the state, they want to see affordable housing funded and developed using these programs. The challenge is, we're going through that right now. We apply for those funds once a year, the end of August. We will work on an application 2 to 5 years, and you get one shot once a year for units to be developed and come online 2 years from now. And so with that, over the years as construction costs have gone up, specifically over the last 2 to 3 years, and I will say now in the current interest rate environment that we're in, but construction costs going up, land costs going up, the number of projects that are awarded a year is now 5, maybe 6, and that's across the state, with an average project size of 40 units. We developed one that we had a ribbon cutting for here a month ago, and that was a 62 unit complex in Sioux Falls That, and we are doing one in Spearfish, 62 units, is the last project of that size that we can do because of the limitation of tax credits and the federal financing and the state financing to build these. You throw in there now with the interest rates and where they've gone. I will say Vineyard Heights, that great project, 62 units, was 4.75% interest rate. We are now over 8%. That does not work in our world. We have a big gap. The difference between us and market rate developers are we are limited by those area median income rents that we are talking about here today. And we can't charge more than the federal limits on those rents. And so we need funding to fill the gap. I'm going to make a plug for this, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for the City of Sioux Falls. Without this program, we're not going to get any more units at 30 and 40% than what a developer applies for at the state. And I will say Vineyard Heights, a 62-unit complex, we had 2 units at 30% and we had 3 units at 40%. We can't do any more than that without some financing that comes in. So the City of Sioux Falls and I will say Thrive, the Housing Action Team, what they have done here is put together a great proposal. And this will help us that develop affordable housing, will help us, one, fill that gap in order to get those units at 30 and 40% of the area median income.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Joan, for that. Thank you all panelists. Hopefully everyone in the audience has a little bit better understanding of the lived experience from these various perspectives. And now we are going to help define for you exactly what the Housing Trust Fund proposal is. And so thank you very much. We'll bring up the next panel. All right, coming on stage, we have Annie Livengood, Gailey Reideman, Shireen Ranchow, and Andy Patterson. Each of these panelists are going to speak to a different piece in the proposal. So at the end, hopefully with all of their different input, you'll be able to piece it together. However, this panel will remain on stage for Q&A after. So, Annie, let's have you start us off. Could you introduce us to the Housing Trust Fund proposal and the meaning of affordability? And I shall introduce you as well as you get the mic ready.
I think it's on.
Annie? Okay. Annie is a licensed social worker. She has 20 years of experience working with vulnerable populations. She was our community's first housing navigator, helping families of all sizes locate housing and resources. She has served on the Housing Action Team since its inception. She is also a member of the Sioux Falls Human Relations Commissions and president of the Policy and Advisory Committee for the state's Continuum of Care. Now, please introduce us to the Housing Trust Fund.
Okay, well, we are in the process of defining it. It is exactly what Joan mentioned before, that it's a fund for these gaps that we have for funding. It needs to be sustainable. It has to be an ongoing source of funds, and we have to have community buy-in for it to work. So we need the community to own this with us for it to be successful.
Any data points that you would like to review?
Oh, sure. So I will reiterate some of what Susie and the others have said. I wrote a note down, so I have to look at it. Hold on. Losing Kathy's stuff about EBT. Where is she? There she is. Okay, so when we don't have enough housing, right, we have homeless families and we have families that are cost burdened. I have a couple of quick stories to tell you. Like Richie, I'm more of a storytelling type of person. So when I worked with families that were homeless or looking for housing, we had a family of 4 that was living in their car. They would drive the car to one of the local McDonald's, and they would park there. so that dad could start a shift at, I think he was pretty early, like 6 a.m. or something. And then the older kids could go in and shower in the bathroom. And then they could start their day and get to school. So that's just one of the families that we ran into that this housing trust fund would assist. I also worked with the sweetest little grandma you ever did see, and she had a grandchild that she was raising. She was trying to make it on her pension, or her retirement was about $1,400 a month, and her rent was $800, and they were increasing it to $950, and so she knew she was no longer going to be able to do that. And so I worked with her to try to find affordable housing, which is very difficult because we don't have a lot of it, right? And then just one other quick thing, because we know some of the professions are up here of who this fund would assist, but sometimes it's just really nebulous to talk about these concepts if we don't meet these people every day. So I would just ask everyone to kind of think of where they were in the past couple of weeks, or where they might be going in the next couple of weeks. Like, did you stop at the pharmacy? Did you go to the pet store? Did you stay at a hotel? Did you donate to a nonprofit? Check in with a receptionist or get an oil change? Let's see, did you have somebody mow your lawn or clean your house or take out your take your garbage away? If any of these apply to you, and others, you can think of them yourself too, but you have likely met somebody that is housing cost burden or homeless even. So that's kind of just putting that into your own life and thinking about who these people are.
We will hear from Gayleen next. As a retired landlord, Gayleen previously owned and managed apartments that served the working poor. She has been a member of the Housing Action Team for 4 years. So Gayleen, can you walk us through rent versus income in today's economy, and why the Housing Trust Fund proposal focuses on renters?
Right. Right now in South Dakota, just under 33% of all renters are paying more than 35% of their income to rent. And as we heard from Dr. Smith, that's considered rent burdened. In Sioux Falls, it's 37%. 37% of the people renting are considered rent burdened. The average rent in the Sioux Falls area for a 2-bedroom apartment, $1,030. And that is assuming you're working 40 hours a week, which means you're earning $19.80 per hour. None of those people that Annie just mentioned are making $19.80 an hour. And the other number that I discovered in doing some research is that in 2022, rents increased in Sioux Falls by 27%. The 2022 South Dakota Department of Labor, and this is for Sioux Falls, 25% of the wages are below $31,400 a year. 50% of the people working, and these are people working, they're not deadbeats, $41,500 a year. 50%, half of our working population is making less than $42,000 a year. That means that about 20,000 people, 20 to 25% of the employees in this community are making less than $30,000 a year. I'll have more to say at the end.
Thanks, Gayleen. Shireen, let's start digging into some details. But first, during her professional career, Shireen spent 42 years in the affordable housing field. Her experience includes rental assistance programs, programs for the unhoused and housing development. As a member of the Housing Action Team and other community boards, she continues to advocate for accessible housing options for the Sioux Falls community. So Shireen, how would this work?
Okay, well, yeah, that's a good question because we have all this need. What's the tools that we can use? Well, I know Joan Franken talked about some of the tools that are currently out there, but they're not enough. So we do need another tool in the toolbox. So one of them, the one we're talking about today, is an affordable housing trust fund. And how that would work is applicants for that funding, you'll see listed up there, would include property owners that want to rehab existing homes or apartments, nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, housing authorities, units of government, regional organizations, and other nonprofit organizations. Now, these applicants, though, will have to have the development capacity for the type of project they're proposing. They have to have financial capacity to complete the project, and they have to have a history of favorable maintenance and management with existing rental properties. And the important thing, which was talked about a little with the first panel, is they'll also have to plan for or partner with a service provider to minister flexible voluntary support services, because those support services are needed to help the individuals and families living in those apartments to be able to remain in stable, affordable housing. Now, as far as the type of projects that would be eligible, again, you'll see those on the slide, but they would include the new construction of multifamily projects, retrofitting existing buildings, and the existing buildings could be current residential properties or it could be non-residential properties. That would include 4 or more apartments, or the preservation of existing assisted projects. And these would be projects that are currently affordable, but the funding they're receiving is term limited, and as that funding runs out, they will need additional funding to be able to keep those apartments affordable. Now, all projects will be located in the city limits of Sioux Falls, and they will have to be affordable to families or individuals that are at 40% of the median family income or below. And there will be priority if they can get them at 30% of median family income. The rents will also have to be affordable for no less than 10 years. But there will be priority for projects that can make them affordable for 20 to 30 years. And as with most construction projects, the plans and designs will have to be approved and reviewed by the city planning and development, and they'll have to meet all applicable building, fire, and zoning codes. Now, how the financing of the trust fund, how that will work is the housing trust probably will not be the only funder for the project. There's just not going to be enough money to do that. But it will be used to leverage with other funding streams. And kind of like was talked about with projects, you need a lot of layers of fundings to make it happen. So this would be one of those layers. But it would probably be the most flexible of the funding sources, because it will include options. Could be grants, could be long-term forgivable loans. It'll kind of depend on what the needs are for a specific project in order to make it a success. And by offering this flexibility with the funding, the developer will have an opportunity to come up with creative solutions that might not be fundable elsewhere. Now, who's going to oversee all this to make sure it's going the way it should be? Well, the oversight of the trust will be provided by the Accessible Housing Advisory Board, or a lot of times called AHAB. And AHAB is a joint jurisdictional body that was established in 2020, and it's made up of representatives from the City of Sioux Falls, both Minnehaha and Lincoln counties and the Sioux Falls School District. Now, AHAB will be responsible for overseeing City Hall staff that will have responsibility for the management promotion of the trust. Now, applications from those who are interested in the funding, there'll be an established schedule for those, and it'll be through the request for proposal or RFP process. And AHAB will make recommendations on the projects as far as funding goes, but those recommendations will then go to the City Council. And it will be the City Council that will have the final approval for projects and the amount of funding that they will receive.
Thank you. Final on our panel, if this will go, it will be Andy Patterson. He serves as the president of the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, where he works with donors, nonprofits, and civic leaders to help advance ideas and strategic community investments. Andy, what does the proposal say about how the Housing Trust Fund could be financially supported?
Yeah, it's a good tool, but it needs money to work, and that's always the hard part, right? And it's not insignificant. I think as we think about developers and what they're trying to do, and it was great to hear what Joan and her company does. It's not insignificant. In 2023, it was about $180,000 per unit. And as Shireen was saying, putting together the financing for these involves lots of sources, and it probably gets even more complicated when interest rates get higher. So one of the things as someone new to all this, you see affordable housing, you see things coming from the state, but to truly become affordable at that 30 and 40%, we need extra layers, and even more so right now with rates where they are. So it's not insignificant. So we are proposing a cash infusion up front, kind of one time, almost a down payment, if you will, right now. That would come from the city of Sioux Falls. And then the second part that it will involve ongoing conversations is, what is a sustainable revenue source for this? So this is not an endowment we're investing in. This is a fund that's dedicated money that will all be paid out when eligible projects that are a great fit come up. And so there are two parts. One will be that initial dollar amount, but we know from looking at other housing trust funds around the country, the key to this is that there is a recurring revenue source. As you heard Joan say, they're talking 2 to 5 years. And so if a proposal pops up in 6 months, that does not give time to reorder how the planning is. So we need to make a consistent commitment, and that involves probably identifying some dedicated revenue sources that will happen on a recurring basis. The other thing we find, I live in the world of philanthropy, but the thing we find from other trust funds across the country is this isn't typically a solution solved by philanthropy. There's roles for donors if they want to be a part of it, but we have to look at how do we use public dollars to fund this tool to make more affordable housing happen.
Awesome, thank you. All of the individuals that you've heard from this evening have put a lot of time and energy into architecting this proposal, taking it from idea to proposal to presentation tonight. But the work continues, and so this next question is for all of you. What is next, and how can everyone attending tonight help the trust fund move forward? It is.
Tell your friends, okay? And we're going to share the QR code. We're going to do all those things. Oh, it is on. Sorry. I yelled, so you probably heard me, but yeah, tell your friends. Shout it from the rooftops, right?
Awesome. Next, Gayleen.
When I joined this group, the objective was to help children succeed. That is the Thrive's objective. We want to see children succeed and be successful adults. One way to do that is to provide affordable housing, as we heard from Richie, the impact that not for children, not to know where they're going to sleep tonight, is huge on their educational development. 1,364 kids last school term were considered homeless. And that doesn't include possibly younger children that aren't in the school system. When I started with Thrive 4 years ago, that number was around 1,100. That's a 24% increase in 4 years of children being considered homeless. And our goal is to no longer see children living in cars.
Shireen.
So it's always good, you might agree and you might think, oh yeah, we have a need and we should do this, but it can't just stop there. We have to let the city leaders know this. They have to know that people in the community are behind this, and that they think it's very important, that this is something that we as a community should be doing for the people who live here, for all of our workers and our families and our children. So that would involve not only contacting your city council people, letting them know where you stand on this, and they are going to be having budget meetings coming up in just a few weeks. The first hearing is going to be on September 5th at 6 p.m. and there will be a line item in that budget to fund this, hopefully. If you let them know, we're trying to get them to put a line item in the budget. So let your council know that this is important, this needs to go in the budget. So be there, contact them by email or call them, be at the meeting, and the first meeting is September 5th. The second hearing will be on September 12th, and that's when they will be doing the final voting on their budget. So this is really important to take some action. Don't just nod your head and say, yeah, this is a good thing, but let the leaders know that this is something our community needs.
And Andy, final word.
Yeah, and when that, while that hopefully that funding is being approved, there are still some policy things that are going to have to be taken from the recommendations of the Housing Action Team. And so we're suggesting that the homeless task force that was set up about this time last year, that I think some great recommendations came out, and the Housing Trust Fund was one thing noted in some of their preliminary recommendations, that group continue conversations, and we're talking about funding, about the oversight of this, because there is some of those details that need to be solved before this can be up and running.
Thank you.